Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining Namali and me for this Enneagram Type 6 panel. So to create some context first, the Enneagram is a personality type system which divides human personalities into 9 types based on specific preferences and drives. And although the Enneagram is a model of reality and not reality itself, it nonetheless remains a useful tool to make sense of individual variations in personality and behavior. And today, of course, Namali and I are hosting a panel with people who primarily identify as Enneagram Type 6s. And we can think of Type 6s as skeptical seekers of safety and security. And often Type 6s are called skeptics or loyalists because of their tendency to both question authority as well as loyally commit themselves to people, jobs, causes, or ideas which make them feel more secure. And indeed, Type 6s tend to feel relatively unsafe in the world, and they can deeply worry about the trustworthiness of individuals, groups of people, and institutions, as well as about the trustworthiness of their own mind. And as a result of this uncertainty, Type 6s can have difficulty making important decisions or taking on important responsibilities. So Type 6s tend to be deeply focused on safety and security. And of course, some of the advantages of being focused on safety and security is that Type 6s tend to be good at identifying safety hazards, solving problems, and debunking questionable claims. And of course, one of the disadvantages of being focused on safety and security is that Type 6s can sometimes worry about threats to their personal safety, which only exist in their imagination. Now, within the Enneagram, Type 6s, like Type 5s that we discussed last time, are fear types. And the core fear of Type 6s is typically the fear of being harmed, being abandoned, or being left without support. And Type 6s generally express their fear by preparing for the future so they can avoid what they fear, or by directly engaging their fear through taking risks. Now, if we think of Type 6s in terms of levels of functioning, we can say that when Type 6s function at an average level, they tend to be reliable, trustworthy, and affectionate. They can also be insecure, evasive, and suspicious. And when Type 6s function at an unhealthy level, they can become irrational, authoritarian, and paranoid. And when Type 6s function at a healthy level, they tend to be courageous, cooperative, and dependable. Now, broadly speaking, Type 6s can cultivate healthy functioning by acknowledging that fear is a naturally occurring emotion, which they can learn to manage constructively when making important choices, by learning to be just as loyal to their own personal values as they are to people who make them feel safe, and by learning to tell the difference between realistic actual threats to their personal safety and unrealistic imaginary threats to their personal safety so they can respond accordingly. So Namali, what more can you add about Type 6s?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So if you look at the diagram of an Enneagram, each type has 2 types on either side of them. So for the Type 6, and these are called the wings, and any type on the Enneagram has a certain relationship. They can look like one of the 2 types that are adjacent to them. So for Type 6, the type for them, obviously, they have either a 5-wing or a 7-wing. And so the 6 with the 5-wing is called the defender, because they actually have a little bit more of the 5 characteristics in them. And so they typically tend, the 6s that typically tend to be quite collaborative, and they work really well in teams. With the 5-wing, they might actually become a little bit more inward looking and a little bit more cerebral, and might want to protect their privacy quite a bit. So that's why they're called the defender. A Type 6 with a 7-wing, they're called a buddy. The 6 who tends to be quite cautious and, defended often, or security oriented. The one with the 7-wing tends to be a little bit more extroverted and are willing to take risks, and they might actually be a little bit more outgoing and sort of more happy. They show up as a little bit more happy. So those are the wings. And then when you also look at the diagram of the Enneagram, you'll see that there are arrows. And for the type 6, the arrows are as such. When a 6 is who might be sort of trapped in those ego constraints, their fixations of fear and anxiety, under stress, a 6, they can really look like an unhealthy type 3. What does that really mean? So we all encounter fear. Every type on the Enneagram, we encounter fear. And for the unhealthy 3, what that looks like is that they rely on setting goals and achieving to mitigate that experience of fear. So an unhealthy 3 might really throw themselves into action, might become like a workaholic and overly competitive. And all that is to avoid the fear. So a type 6 under stress can go there. They can look like they sort of forget their sense of loyalty and duty and instead become very competitive and disconnected with their authenticity. The other arrow goes towards their integration, and a 6 who is self-aware and sort of having an experience of being released from those ego constraints, they can look like a healthy type 9. And so they learn to relax a little and they give that fear a bit of a break. They become much more flowful, kind of go with the flow, trusting, less suspicious, and able to connect with others with a deeper sense of inner security and optimism. They feel a little bit more optimistic, whereas 6s are generally sometimes labeled a little bit, judged a little bit as pessimistic. So a 9 wing could look a little bit more optimistic. Subtypes, as I often say, is really important in the Enneagram. And in the Enneagram, the 3 subtypes are self-preservation, sexual, and social. And these are subtypes for every Enneagram type. And which is why you can put 3 Enneagram types in a room of the same type, and they would still look very different. And that's because of their subtypes. Type 5s are said to be a type where the 3 subtypes are hard to differentiate. So in other words, the 3 subtypes of a 5, they're kind of harder to differentiate. They can look similar, but a type 6 is said to be the 3 subtypes that make 6s look different the most out of all types in the Enneagram. So the self-preservation 6, self-preservation in any type, means that they're concerned about preserving their life, preserving their body, preserving their home, a sense of preservation. For type 6, they're called warmth. These are the 6s that really embody that sense of the 6, the sort of the stereotypical 6 that we typically learn about. They tend to experience a lot of fear, doubt, and they have a strong need for creating security. They might doubt themselves. So they seek out someone or something that they can trust. And once they find that something or someone, they can be really loyal to them. And by kind of creating those connections is how they create a sense of security for themselves. And the way that they create those connections typically tend to be very friendly and warm. And they really sort of are open in how they create those connections. And the connections are really to mitigate that sense of fear and anxiety that they experience a lot. And so because of these connections that they create, they can actually look or be mistaken sometimes for a type 2. They're very helpful. They are really, connected. They really treasure their relationships in that way. And that's how they preserve themselves. Another type. So a really big thing about type 6 is, and I'm not sure if Lee mentioned this, the phobic and the counterphobic. The counterphobic and the phobic 6 effect is what actually makes in the entire Enneagram type 6s hardest to identify sometimes. 6s get really caught up in sort of thinking about, or rather people who don't know what their Enneagram type is sometimes, not always, sometimes end up being sixes, because sixes are actually really complex and harder to identify. And sometimes it's because of these subtype differences that are quite large, and also the fact of the counterphobic six and the phobic six. So sixes generally, as people who come with the fear orientation, phobic sixes are really trying to run away from that fear. They have a phobia in some sense about their own fear. The counterphobic six is also fearful, but the counterphobic six runs towards the fear. And that's how they try to deal with the fear. It's the same fear, but the phobic and the counterphobic are doing it in two different ways. So the self-preservation six is the one that most looks like the phobic six. The fear is actually palpable, and they actually try to create security by sort of moving away from whatever that brings fear to them. So the sexual fear, they're called the strength, or even beauty, or the warrior. This is a six that tends to look like who's referred to as the counterphobic. So this is the one that tends to most often fight the fear. They actually go outward and fight the fear. So in order to deal with their fear, they become very action-oriented. They're willing to poke the bear. They're willing to poke the bear and willing to take some strong risks. They could be a bit rebellious and riotous. They explore physical strength to create that sense of security, or it could also be a more mental strength, intellectual strength, and they sort of hold those views that they might have very fast. And so those opinions are hard to shake. These sixes are very opinionated, and those opinions are really hard to shake. They really dislike authority, and they doubt others, whereas these sixes doubt others, whereas the self-preservation sixes doubt themselves, right? And so because of this outwardly kind of action-oriented fighter-like look of this sexual six, the warrior six, they can sometimes be mistaken for an eight. And the social six is the most duty-bound. So they're called duty or the social guardian. These social sixes are really hardworking, and they try to find security by sort of finding rules that they can follow, rules and regulations that give them a sense of security. They can look a little like a one, just as I say that. They seek security in more social situations, but also in intellectual, sort of getting involved in intellectual projects and or a work. So the group and their relationships are really important to them. And these sixes try to deal with their fear by setting clear agreements and rules with others and being very dutiful in a group setting. These boundaries are very important, and those are the things that provide a sense of security for them. The agreements provide security for them. They look for authority, which can mean they look for authority, whereas the sexual six runs away from, doesn't like authority. This sort of duty-bound social six looks for authority, which can mean that could mean that it's a friend or a colleague, but could also be a teaching or a workshop, something that they learn from a workshop, or like a methodology for an action or something like that, a theory or a philosophy or something. That could also be what gives them that sense of security, or because that's what then becomes their sense of authority that they trust in. So they trust the outside other more than trusting themselves. And so some of their work has to be in reclaiming their power.
That was really good. I've been hearing this stuff for years. That was right. Thank you.
Good.
It's always wonderful when the types themselves recognize the story about them, and that is very insightful also for all of the people listening to see how something that's perhaps not very familiar to yourself can be so familiar to someone else. And that highlights the fact that many of us are so different from each other that we really are complementary in a deep way. So the first question that Marley and I like to ask is, how did you discover your type, and how does your type show up for you in your daily life?
So I took a course with where they're comparing the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and Enneagram. It was brilliant. It was the first time Helen was really teaching this stuff in public, because it had been seen as very esoteric, and she was getting a lot of heat for teaching it to people like me. But after 2 quarters, she said, okay, any of you dummies haven't figured it out yet? Come to my house at 7 p.m., Friday night. I said, okay. So I showed up, and she asked me some questions, and I started on my thing, and she said, oh, you're describing me. And Helen was a 6. And then kind of all the light bulbs went off when I started getting it. So I was rather kind of diagnosed by Helen Palmer, who anyway I've connected with later, and I just adored and respect her, and she gave us a lot. But it was so old. The DSM, homosexuality was a characterological disorder at that point. And in the new version, it's heterosexuality. That's the characterological disorder. So we have made progress. Anyway, yes, from Helen, and just the way that she could read me like a book.
So, and John, if you could say a little more about how the 6ness shows up in your life, in ways that you notice most.
Yeah, well, I certainly, in the beginning, when Nomali, we were talking, I saw that's me, all the way through, both wings, etc. But when you got to the types, and I was the youngest of 3 brothers, and so I got knocked around a bit. And back in those days, kids fought a lot in school, so I don't know. So that was kind of a threat. And I studied martial arts very early stage, before Bruce Lee, anybody knew about who he was, and judo and karate and all these things. And I kind of grew up in a hunting culture, so I knew about guns, and I just kind of, the world is not safe. And then I had this big opening to God when I was around 11 or 12. And one of the things that I didn't suspect, that I was a 6, because it's all about fear. That's the basic thing you're dealing with. And I was like, I'm not afraid of anything. I was a soldier in martial arts. I can take care of myself. I've, done all this stuff, climbed mountains. And I started thinking about it. And I was like, oh my God, I'm scared of everything. I'm scared of living. I'm scared of dying. I'm scared of failure. I'm scared of success. I'm scared of being alone. I'm scared of being in relationships. It's like, oh my Lordy. And then I just seen how I had created this big, this warrior type thing. And I also, my wife knows, we go to a restaurant, get me, the place in the corner of the room so I can scan what's going on and know where the exits are. And, I do this unconsciously, this guy's a threat, blah, blah, blah. I just go through it and do this, this thing also. I was also an investigator, military police investigator, which is really good for a 6 of that type, because you're just, and I got out of law enforcement because I was getting too much like that. I had to back off. So, yes, the realization of fear and the loyalty thing. I am very loyal. I had to cancel things to get here, but I'm not going to let Nomali down, by God. It was very important for me to be here. And I also had early life in a cult. So I gave my loyalty to, this was when I was a teen. And so, man, I have been one of the big cult bashers ever since then. I don't like cults. So, authority but also extreme loyalty too. Like, I'm really, really loyal to Ken because he was so good to me. And I kind of feel the same way about our integral community. Is, with all our foibles and all our train wrecks and all the dumb things that we do as being humans, I still really care about this community and the people I've grown older with over the years and what we've been able to do together. Is that, Lee, is that helpful?
Oh, that's very helpful, John. And thanks for sharing the depth of your experience and highlighting a number of aspects that are seen as being very essential to type 6. So thanks very much. Mm. So, Miguel, can we pass it over to you next, please?
So I just got a little pop-up that said internet was unstable about a couple of minutes back. So please let me know if I start cutting out. For me, realizing I was a 6, I did this Integral Coaching Canada program I started many years ago. And as part of the second module, you have to go down the path of learning about Enneagram and figuring out what is your type. So I did a little bit of some of the work there, just diving into different books and as well as taking some of the assessments. And that's how I landed on 6. It just made sense. And I was a little, I guess, maybe like annoyed or frustrated when I kind of landed on that. I wasn't super like enthralled by the idea of like fear and always seeking certainty. But when I reflected back on my life, it made sense. It just was hard to kind of accept in the moment that was the case. But at the same time, just kind of looking at the beauty of the 6, it was also an inspiring moment, I guess, just kind of realizing that we come with all of that, the bad and the good at the same time. So yeah, it's only been maybe like 3-4 years that I've found out about my type. Before that, I was not really aware.
Yes, thanks, Miguel. And we said this during the type 1 panel, but almost for everyone who reads their type, they think, oh, this is really the best type to be. But then indeed, none of the types are the best to be, but they all have their shadow and their benefits. So
yeah,
your response is very understandable. And how does the 6ness show up in your daily life?
Yeah, I would say one of the things is likely the loyalty to a fault. I'd say it's such a great quality to have. Like I've been told to people that, you know, when they give me something or I say yes to something, that they don't have to worry about whether or not I'll show up or I'll be there or if I'll be late. Like there's that sense of like, okay, so Miguel's taking care of this. That's good. Like yeah, we don't have to worry about it anymore. So definitely a great strength there. But at the same time, I can look back in my past, having worked at 2 organizations where it was like way beyond the time for me to leave there, but it was hard for me to leave because I, being a manager and having worked with these people and having supported them, so it was almost kind of inconceivable to leave them behind and continue on my own journey, even though it's what I needed and it was the time to do it. I just couldn't do it for myself. So I was, I guess, in this sense, sounds odd when I say that, lucky that I got laid off because the company wasn't doing so well. So they kind of forced me out in a way. And I was happy about that. It was like, oh, yes, I was laid out. Thank you. It's just I couldn't actually do it myself. So you can kind of see it's like, okay, it's a great quality, but like there's a time where you need to be able to like go and do something for yourself. And I couldn't even do that for myself. So that was, I've done that twice in my career and definitely something I need to like take a pulse on more often, just kind of check back and see when I need to do more for me than I need to do more for others. So yeah, so that would be one thing. The trust part, I'd say, find it very hard to join anything. I just have that kind of like, whoa, like, what is this? And just, I have to understand it. And who can I talk to? Who should I reach out to? Like, who's the right people to connect and kind of get an understanding of how that works and whether or not this is something I want to spend my time or energy into it. So there's that always this kind of almost fear or there's steps I need to take. I just I don't willy-nilly just join into something open-hearted. Although when I do. So there's this kind of balance there. So I'd say that shows up in my experience. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Miguel. That's very clear examples. And Chuck, how about you? How did you discover that you were 6 and how does that show up for you?
Well, I had a warning show up on my radar also, just like your internet problem, but my problem is more in my mind than technical. So thank you, Namali, for bringing all these other aspects of the Enneagram 6 out, because I am all of those things, every single one of those things. So it's very confusing. Depends on what day, what situation, everything. But definitely a 6, I am. I discovered it kind of like I discovered Integral, just all of a sudden, in conversations going, oh, yes, of course, that makes total sense. So I kind of had the same discovery listening to Helen Palmer. I was at the Integral What's Next conference, and she was speaking. And so I definitely connected with that. And I also, as you had just mentioned too, Lee, I go, oh my God, I don't want to be a 6. I would rather be anything else besides a 6. And then I learned that she was a 6 too. And then that really made a lot of sense to me, how I was taking the takeaway from that. And so I read, a little bit more, came up with Russ Hudson's book and read about more of the different levels, the healthy, the unhealthy. And that totally turned it all around. It really did. It made me feel like, first of all, it is more complicated, but it's also there's different ways of operating within a 6. And that made me so much more optimistic. I mean, the higher levels of functioning for a 6 became more of how I wanted to conduct my daily life. And as I go through various things, like this morning, I'm doing laundry, and I go down in the basement, and the dryer was dead. I'm thinking, oh my God, how am I going to get the dryer out of here? It's going to have to replace it and all of this stuff. Well, it was just a fuse that had tripped. But I mean, I go that distance. I go, oh my God, what's going to happen now? So then I take note of that in myself, in my head, and I go, that, sometimes I refer to myself when I have those kinds of thoughts. I go, I'm a sick 6. And I'm constantly on a daily basis, thinking and talking to myself that way. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yes, certainly does, Chuck. And that's one of the ways that 6ness shows up in your life, indeed. And Nomali was speaking about the degree also, and I also refer to that, the degree to which type 6s can create imaginary worlds based on fear or based on anxiety. And I would say that's also related to the way that 6s can be very good at describing the processes they go through, because they tend to tell themselves stories about what's happening now and what's going to happen in the future. And they tend to be very aware of their own response in relation to their own fear. So would you agree that that's also your experience, that you are highly aware also of the stories that are living within your awareness?
Very much so. Very much so. And that's one of the gifts of knowing, which Enneagram type you are, and it, on what, wing you're working at, all the different subtypes that exist within me. And so, that self-talk really helps. And then, if I'm alone too long, that self-talk can go too far in any one direction. So that's why I also exhibit that action of leaning in towards things and putting myself in situations that are a bit uncomfortable, but it's, I seek it out from other people too. For example, I go to many different functions, by myself, and crowd of people is very upsetting to me anyway. But the anxiety I have of driving to any of these functions is like, why am I doing this? I don't like this. And this is just, what can come of this? And then I talk myself into, well, generally the history has been, I do this and I end up really enjoying it. And there's somebody or something that is really positive for me. And so that sustains me. And that keeps me going, because when I do lean into my fears, generally it's good.
Well, thanks for that addition. And I forget which philosopher it was. It might have been Seneca, but who said that we suffer most from that which we fear, and not that from what we actually suffer. So it's more suffering from the fear than from the actual suffering. So
Lee and I have been doing these Enneagram panels, and now we're all the way down to panel number 6. And as each of you are speaking, in the same way that every other type, the panel members were speaking, I'm just noticing how easy it is to just fall in love with each of you. Just like knowing each person's type is just such a beautiful experience. It's really touching. So the question that I'm posing to each of you, and we'll start with John again here, is, how do you notice throughout your life, and especially in your current life, and especially if you can share through stories and examples, in the way that we have heard a little bit of examples from each of you already, but I invite you to go into even more examples of how the real sort of the wonderful, beautiful gifts of being an Enneagram type 6, the loyalist, shows up in your life. And also, how do you go into the struggle of being a 6, those more difficult aspects of your type, such as really getting fixated on fearing and anxiety and doubting, and not to say that any of them are bad, because they serve a purpose for sure, but how do they become a struggle for you? So the gifts and the struggles of being an Enneagram type. So once again, I'll start with you, John.
Yeah, well, one of the gifts, I think the 6 has been called the loyalist, the trooper. We can be pretty tough, and we just keep going when it gets hard, we just keep plowing through. And that helped me as a soldier. And later I spent years being a wilderness guide. And, we have people relying on you. And I was in one of these early trips in the wilderness. I had still these old boots left over from the army, which were pretty lousy boots. And I was like, I'm so sick of this. And the boy said, well, you better get used to it, because you're going to do a bunch of it. All right. So, that kind of toughness, that loyalist, the authority thing, and is I don't have much patience with people that, especially that take spiritual things and, try to claim that they're the most enlightened and use that as a way to take power away from others and gain power for themselves. Really bothers me. And I have Guru Dar, when anybody starts playing that game, I kind of like pick up on it right away and don't like it. I have been involved in the Ukrainian struggle, and it just completely just connects a lot of things in me. And we had Ukrainian integral friends before the war, before the invasion, and I don't know. Ukraine has just been a representation of so many of the virtues of 6: the courage, the toughness, the sacrifice, the opposing, the overwhelming power of the Russian army and Putin and all his stuff. So that deeply touched me, their deep love for each other and for their children, for their old people, for every, the thing. It's just, it's been a light in the darkness. And I think sometimes I suffer from, in our other postmodern era, cynicism is a big thing. It's like what I hear in politics, like a lot of people that were, into Trump or into the right wing, finally they figure that out, that, that he was not the Messiah or whatever. And they say, well, they're all the same. And it's not true. They're not all the same, but that's, I think, with all our wealth and all our technology and all the stuff that we've produced in our Western civilization, the interiors have been very weak, and we're left with just depression and cynicism. And so the Ukraine things really sparked me. And there's a song I wrote called Ukraine on YouTube. You can watch it. And the daughter of a friend of mine, 15-year-old girl, she put together the video. It's unbelievably moving and just speaks to my nature and what I've read out of this thing. So what was the last part of your question, Lee?
Well, and Amali asked
the gifts and the struggles. The gifts and the struggles.
Yeah, the struggles. Well, I'm at my best moments, I'm pretty psychic, just like Helen Palmer was. You know, she was one of those sixes. You just scan so much the environment, just naturally you start to pick up. And when I was doing coaching online for years, sometimes I would just know what their dream was about before. And this is not all the time, but at that. So I'm very sensitive to outside stimuli. And therefore, that makes me very susceptible to the pain and the suffering of the world. And I suffer from depression. I've struggled with it for many, many years. And that's why when I worked with addicts for years, although I'm not an addict, they like accepted me as a brother because they knew I was fucked up as they were. You know, when I described what my experience was, yeah, okay, all right, you get us. That's what it's like. So I in turn to and I take it on, and it's I'm not effective at avoiding. So I have to power through. But yeah, I think that's been the hardest thing that I've had to deal with, and it's also been a great gift. It's given me great, compassion and understanding for the suffering of others. But I tend to absorb it, and it comes out or doesn't come out. It's with me, and I've learned just to be present with it and sit with it and welcome it and let it do its thing. And then thank God, the light begins to, the fog begins to lift, the sun begins to rise, and I'm okay again. But sometimes that can take quite a while, several hours of meditation or several weeks of, plowing through this stuff.
It seems Namali might have frozen up and has dropped off, so she'll join us in a bit. But thanks, John, indeed. And there's also a part of the type 6 that is very sensitive towards power imbalances and towards bullying. And I don't know if this is also your interpretation of the Russia-Ukraine situation, but it sounds to me, at least, as if you might also be responding to the way that Russia is basically bullying Ukraine. And
that would be 100% yes, Lee. You're absolutely right. That's a huge part of it.
Yeah. And there was also something in the way that you were speaking about the gifts when you described sitting in the restaurant, for instance, where you're observing all of the potential threats, because they do exist, and they might not be actual at that moment, but they are potentially real. So I would say there's also a way in which just like Chuck, you were also saying with the dryer, the potential for that situation is always there. So it's not always wasted time to go there in your imagination, because when the situation presents itself in reality, you are prepared.
I hate bullying. I just viscerally don't like it at all. And so that really struck a chord when you said that. So
I think that's also the loyalty within the sixes is very often loyalty also to the underdog and to people who are being oppressed or marginalized. So that's right. Another beautiful gift of the sixes. And they're willing to sacrifice themselves for the greater good if they're healthy in that way.
Yeah. And
Miguel, how would you say that the gifts and the challenges of a type 6 feature in your life?
Yes. Well, what we were just talking about right now about the bullying or just being that trooper, that person that really wants to protect and do good. I'd say that's shown up a lot for me just in terms of my the teams that I've been part of in the past in my career in software engineering. As one of the leads of the team, I always felt it was my duty to protect the team from the externalities of what could impact their ability to deliver what they wanted. But I would do that with compassion and care, and I just had this innate kind of need to do that. That was just whether or not I was a lead or not. It really didn't matter. It's just the way I showed up in these teams, and I could say that having higher ups not really understanding how an impact of a decision will have, but I can see it and I can know what it will do on the team, and I can see that trickle down effect and all of that. And you're really being at the forefront and be like, I'll deal with that. You guys keep and keep working on what you're doing, was something that I did quite often in my career there. So that speaks to me when we said perhaps bullying is not the exact key word here, since there's not an aspect of bullying, but as of protection, of being the trooper at the front and just kind of helping out. Mm-hmm. Another aspect, I'd say, it's kind of funny, because people that know me well know that when I put thoughts towards something, I tend to put a lot of thought, and it can take time before you make a decision. So one of the kind of drawback of questioning everything. But when I come to an actual decision, there's that sense of like, oh yeah, he's done his research. He's spent the time. Like if he says this, like that's good. Like, and people are just kind of okay with just taking that and rolling with it. And an example is just funny. My cousin has come to me many times in her questions for technology. And then I've been in the technology world. And so having a recommendation for me was just like, okay, so that's what you're saying I should be getting. Okay, thank you. And then she goes on and she just buys that. Doesn't care so much more. She knows that if I've put in the time, if I'm recommending that, I'm not saying it for myself. I'm saying this is what could be useful for you. She's fine with that. And funny enough, she's done that also for purchasing a vehicle in the past. So that's not just a small purchase. It's a pretty big purchase, but she just felt the way how I thought about it, the way the time I've spent just thinking about why I would choose this vehicle, she just felt like that's, oh, perfect. I'm just going to go buy that vehicle. So kind of funny in these ways to how things kind of can happen sometimes. So those would be some of the, I guess, the beauty, the gifts of the 6 that I'd say can kind of pop up.
Oh, that's wonderful, Miguel. And one of the things that stands out for me is that the authority principle. So you're basically, it sounds as if you reflect on what would an authoritative advice be, and then you do the work to create a temporary authority in yourself, and then you refer people to that authority that you've created so that they can make informed decisions. So there's, I would say it's a very beautiful way of taking the best information available, packaging it for people in a trustworthy way, and then giving it to them to do whatever they want to do with it.
Yeah, that's well said. It's not about me, what I want. It's about how I can take what I've already understood, and then they can make their own decision with that. Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Amalie, you're back. Wonderful.
Yes, there's no Wi-Fi in the area suddenly.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Keep going. Yeah, I'll jump in when you're done.
Thanks. I was basically continuing your question about the gifts and the challenges. So we're moving to Chuck.
Well, I could probably talk all day about the challenges and the negative things. But at the same time, the challenges are also opportunities to think differently. So I do spend a lot of time in my head, like maybe everybody does, but it seems always more front center to me. Some of the challenges, I guess, are one of those things where for myself, I look at so many different perspectives. And they can start out being very negative, and some of those things I just try to get a handle on. One is I can be impatient. I can be, a couple sentences ahead of maybe the conversation I'm in, and I jump from one subject to another and think everybody's there listening with me and on board, and maybe not. So I have to slow down. And I can't say that I'm judgmental. I mean, I can be, I suppose, or for groups, but not with individuals. So that's a very distinct difference. Because I really don't think I'm judgmental with individuals. I treat everybody as, totally coming to the party with, something that, but at the same time, I can be around some people that, it might be one of those power things, power imbalance, where, I can be around a famous person, like, I met Bonnie Raitt for one time, who I just adore. And, I really feel like all famous people, what do I have to say to them? I can't, I defer to people, powerful people. And so I'm more interested in hearing what they have to say than anything that I think I can contribute to them. So I guess that's part of a 6. But the other thing that carries me through, I don't know, maybe that's part of how I feel about justice, though. Maybe that underdog thing. I'm very strong on, and that could be a problem too, is, feeling seeing injustice, I should say, and how I react to that. Sometimes I can be, too stubborn, maybe, too contrarian. A lot of times I can be contrarian with people. That can be a negative. But sometimes that I turn that around too, and it can be really fun being a contrarian. It's almost entertainment. And depending on who it is I'm talking to, of course, they have to be a little bit on board with that. But, again, I go back to Namali and coming up with all the different things a 6 can be and is, because I exhibit all of those things. So that could be, that I consider a negative, actually, because there are so many situational type things where I can be this, I can be that, I can be all over the place. But the Enneagram positive things are really what keep me more on track. And so that's why I do try to lean into relationships and people, because they can validate, I guess, myself, and I can feel safer. And when people, I just will not agree with or not click with or something like that, I can still go away thinking, well, they are a different Enneagram type, maybe, and maybe, I'm not communicating well. So I'm all over the place on this question also.
Mm. Well, thanks, Chuck. But it sounds as if you place a high value on also being cooperative, even when you disagree with individuals, that you still try to find at least common ground within shared respect or values. Or is that correct?
I think yes. And I think one of the positive things of how I can react to some of those things is that, simplifying and boiling things down to what's really important and is a big conflict, a big fight, necessary or important in the situation. And generally, there's lots of reasons why it isn't. So
good point. And as an aside, a friend of mine, he found for himself a really good remedy against, for instance, in the Bonnie Raitt situation. He said to overcome that feeling of potential insecurity or asymmetrical relationship, he said that he then thinks of human beings just as hairless apes, and then basically all of the superficiality of fame and things like that fall away, and you're basically animals, or human animals interact. So I don't know if that's helpful.
No, that's helpful. That's helpful because I think the fear, that's where the fear part comes in, and I think everybody has fear in every type. It's just how you react to it.
I agree. Thanks. So the follow-up question, John, and we'll start with you again, is which practices do you have in your life to mitigate the challenges that you experience as a type 6?
I'm the CEO of iWake Technologies and created this company that will create brain entrainment technology to help people go to the desired brainwave states that would take many years sometimes or never get there doing more traditional practices. So, and when I discovered this technology long before iWake, it helped me a lot with my depression. It helped me a lot with my, I go looking for God, And to me, meditation is a preparation for prayer. When I can, when the hairless ape slows down a bit and I can get centered, then that's where I can experience the presence, is which I seem to desire most. And so it's been, just inner work. And when the anxiety or depression comes on, I have to spend more time in the interior. One of my things, in times of stress, practice more, not less. We tend to blow off our practices when things get rough. And I think physical exercise has been a big help. Before I even knew meditation, I was going through really hard times. I would just drag myself to the gym because it seemed to help. And I'd always wear sunglasses so nobody could see my eyes, because I think I looked so pathetically broken. And music has been a big help. And I've been playing the guitar since I was around 12 years old. And I started playing the lead guitar when I was 50, and I really got into blues. So blues is kind of folk, and blues is kind of where I come from. But I find that blues is a great shadow exercise for me. And of course, you can take on the perspective of the downtrodden and the hurting and the pain, and hopefully I kind of mix some search for redemption and all of that. But yeah, the music, the exercise, and prayer is kind of what I do in service. All right. And I tend to be introverted. And they say I'm an introvert who's blessed with or cursed with extrovert gifts. So it keeps me, showing up. But it helps a lot. And learning that I can reach out to friends is a huge one that as I get older, I'm learning to be better at. So, was that helpful?
It certainly does, John. And just to reiterate, you mentioned I Awake, and Namali and I also have recorded a video with you partially about I Awake and the technologies, the brain entrainment technologies that you've developed. And I really do recommend that people download the free version of the app, because there are some exercises, 10 minutes or 20 minutes, that you can listen to for free, which really do or really can have a very profound impact on your state of awareness.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing. So Miguel, what are some of the practices that you use in your daily life?
Yeah. The way I felt that worked well for mine is just the realization that anxiety is felt in the body, but it's created in the mind. At least that's the way I've experienced or kind of figured it out for myself. And so the more time I can practice coming back to my body and just being here now, the less kind of far I get into my mind. So I can catch myself when I'm on a little journey, will like kind of pull myself back. So little practices of like, oh yeah, I just realized that I was somewhere in my mind, and just coming back to my body, just noticing how I'm feeling. That's been super helpful for me. And an easy way to be more in your body is just kind of go for a walk, and just if you have nature around you, just being around trees or nature in general, it just has an effect where we're just reconnecting at that level, and it works really well. So I really enjoy doing that. Although I have to get out of my way to do that and drive somewhere, so I don't do it as often. But definitely something that works well for me. And appreciate what John said about music. I think if you can kind of just almost kind of let go of the mind and just feel into your body. It's like that rhythm. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the song from Eminem called "Lose Yourself." This the phrase that's like you better lose yourself in the music. The moment you own it, you better never let it go. It's just kind of that connection. It's like you just get into your body and you just feel through. Just don't let go of that, and then you won't be lost in your mind all the time. So I think that's just that's true for me. And so just kind of a reminder of that is helpful. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Thanks, Miguel. And it's also, of course, my experience, and I think that's for many human beings, it's the case that when we envision something in our imagination, for instance, a future situation, we tend not to project all of our autonomy and agency into that imagination. So, at least in my own experience, when I experience something in reality, as you were saying, and I'm embodied, then there's much less room for fear than there is when imagining, because in the moment you feel that you have choice and that you have capabilities that you can draw on, which you can't draw on in the imagination of the situation.
Yeah, thank you.
And Chuck, how about you? Practices?
Okay. Well, I relate a lot to Miguel, of course, and John. One of the first things I think of is strengthening the interpersonal relationships around me, the very close ones, because there's always room for growth there and discovery. And but it's the biggest part about it is getting outside of myself. And you had mentioned doing service, and that's probably absolutely number one. And I'll get back to that, but the other one is also physical. And I'm a runner, and I haven't been running for a really long time, maybe 8 years, something like that. And I used to say about how all my life I've always been running from things, and now I feel like I'm running for something, and that's a very different. It puts everything else in a lot of perspective too. And the running has kind of become my meditation. That's when I can, do some thinking, but I also incorporate my whole body as I'm running. I'm going, okay, I do a physical check. Okay, how are my ankles? How are my feet? How are my knees, hips? And I keep going, okay, well, all systems seem go. So I keep going, or if I run some pain, then I go, okay, I'll run through that. I find so many metaphors for life in what I do running. So the physical part's just huge. It does get me more in contact with my body because I kind of ignore it usually. The fear of sixes that have fear of harm, I don't ever seem to have the physical part. I may have the mental, but I don't seem to have the physical. But going back, so that's kind of setting myself up so that at least I'm healthy enough to be going out into the world physically, and then mentally that leads to that. And service is absolutely the best medicine for me. I am a business consultant, and I meet many different people starting a business or having an issue with their business. And it's just absolutely the best to be able to take a situation. This is where one of the gifts of sixers, I can poke holes in things. And I will tell people I can be your worst customer, but I'm on your side. So I will tell you what you should be thinking about, what you're not seeing, et cetera. And so I totally get outside of myself. Then that's where that non-judgmental part comes in too. It's totally, I'm there for them. And to guide as opposed to tell them what they should be doing. And there's nothing more, I feel like I can make those connections. That's got to be another one of the gifts of a six, I think. But it's just the most, humbling, but the most rewarding. And so that's how that brings me out of my head a lot, by just doing service and thinking about others. And so that's a very important part of my life. I mean, all my friends are kind of retiring and stuff like that. And I say, I'll do this until they tell me I can't do this. So anyway, so that's kind of where I am.
That's wonderful, Chuck. And very beautiful that during your running, you do a body scan, basically, which in the language of the six is sort of a systems check, as if I understand.
It is a total systems check. I think, yeah. Yeah.
Very cool. Now, Mali, how's your connection at the moment?
Can you all hear me okay? Okay. Yeah. So I had to join via phone, and I got a text message from Xfinity, the internet provider, also saying internet is down in the whole area. So anyway, here, luckily, the cell phone reception is good. Mike, maybe this is the last question, and then after that we can open up and have audience questions as well. So my question to close is perhaps, in all of our Enneagram types, or just speaking of personality in general, personality is not who we really are. In fact, our sort of non-dual awakened self is the self that is actually empty of the personality restrictions and constraints. But we do have a personality, and our personalities get misunderstood, and we run into struggles all the time in our relationships, often because we're just not seeing that we're each coming from our own personality type. For you, each of you as a type 6, and when you get caught in that type 6 ways that are perhaps misunderstood by others, how can the rest of us have you feeling more understood, more seen, and how can we really just honor you more as a 6? So John, how can we honor you, see you, understand you more? What would you, if you could ask others of something, perhaps you can do a little sentence completion, such as a 6, I wish you would. What would that be, John?
As a 6, I wish you would hold me. As a 6, I would ask for you to deal with my passion.
And by passion, do you mean the passion of fear, as in the Enneagram language, the passion or the fixation?
It means just the roar of injustice. And my wife is a 9, right? The peacemaker. And so I just roar, and she just, and it's like, it's just my heart, just listen. It's okay. I won't bite. It's just, I have to howl at the moon, and I have to cry it from the housetops, and yeah, just to accept my passion, not as an expression of how neurotic I am, which it may be, but as a possible expression of God's cry against injustice and what's wrong.
Beautiful. So what I'm hearing is, actually, before even saying what I'm hearing, another little Enneagram teaching is the Enneagram is often broken into triads. So one of the first primordial triads that we learn about the Enneagram are the centers of intelligence. So we have the gut triad, the feeling triad, and the thinking triad. And you are in the thinking triad, for which the fixation is fear. Or the struggle is fear. And there's another triad called the harmonics triad, and that's around what do we do when we have some kind of a conflict in our lives. And types 4, 6, and 8 go towards emotional intensity. So 6s definitely go into a space of emotional intensity as well. And those of us who go into that emotional intensity can really struggle when others don't understand and meet us at that level of intensity. So for me, you're reminding me a little bit of that, John, that as a 6, you have this powerful emotional intensity, which others may not understand. So when you are in that place, perhaps the rest of us can really embrace and really be more accepting of that intensity that you might exhibit and express.
Yeah, and I tend to know that I can really be scary, and so in relationships, rather than get to this drag out, this fighting and everything, and I never saw my parents argue and fight. I just didn't have a model for it growing up. And I heard him one time behind closed doors, but I didn't get much. And I tend to withdraw. I just go away. If I'm not wanted, see ya. And people have really complained about that behavior, and that you should stay and work it out. But I tend to be afraid of that myself. So I just go away. So I think maybe that's more my 5 thing or something. I'm sure.
Interesting. Okay, so as a 6, we can appreciate the passion in the sense of the exuberance of emotion and intensity, as the rest of us can pay attention to that and be more accepting and embracing of that with the 6.
Yeah. Big
All
help.
right, let's go to Miguel. How can we be more honoring of your 6ness? What do you wish we could give you more of?
My sense sometimes is that because there can be a lot of anxiety and uncertainty in terms of how we show up, that perhaps people feel that they have to tiptoe or kind of like, find a way not to like push us over the edge, maybe, or perhaps that's more of the phobic 6. I would say it's the other way around. I appreciate honesty, like a candid honesty, so that we're not trying to navigate some sort of like, I'm unsure of whether or not I'm actually getting the real information. Like, I appreciate that honesty. So it just makes me feel more at ease if I feel that everything is out in the open. So yeah, I would ask just a good candid honesty about where we're at, either in relationship or at work or just even as friend. I just find that very, I don't know, it lights me up when I know that we are having that conversation, and what's coming out is what needs to come out. Like, I really appreciate that. It makes me feel more stable, certain about where we are in this moment. So yeah, I would say that.
Nice. So it's you're right. So around a 6, who is maybe sort of anxious and fearful and doubting everything and sort of looking for an outlet for their security to kind of get away. What I'm hearing you say is that perhaps we shouldn't fear too much, and just challenge you a little bit, and to really bring on a healthy challenge, sort of a loving authenticity, and to kind of really engage you, to pull you out of that a little bit in a healthy way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I might be reaching too far, but I feel like John had a big smile on his face when I was saying that. So I don't know if there's any relationship there for his experience. Okay. All right.
Nice. So we shouldn't shrink away.
Exactly.
In the midst of the anxiety of a 6, we shouldn't sort of kind of walk away or get afraid of that, or get frustrated with that, the sort of the pessimism or the anxiety of a 6 that we can often sometimes experience. We should actually engage that. We can even sort of like really authentically engage that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Miguel. How about you, Chuck? You, when you are in your sort of unhealthier aspects of the 6, or even the healthier aspects of the 6, we might misunderstand you. We might not really fully honor you. How can we be more understanding, more honoring of your 6ness?
Well, my sickness would be that when I have been honored, I guess, and complimented, I don't believe it. So that I'll just start there. I can't think of necessarily a great way to, what I would be happy with and what would make me feel good. I think honesty's a huge part. So, the heartfeltness, that is probably the most honored thing I can think of, and connection. Just even if opposing views, whatever it is, if there's a connection and a mutual connection, that's honor for me. That's honor for me. But generally, compliments, I'm very uncomfortable with that. So.
Yeah. Is there some other way that we can still appreciate you in that sense? How can we maybe?
That's it. I think just the feeling of a a connection. Just the feel. That's good for me.
Yeah. Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, feeling of a connection.
Yeah.
Oh, Namali, can I add a little thing?
Sure.
In our integral community, and I don't have any data, but I'm convinced there are probably more fives represented in integral than anything else, just because the incredibly beautiful intellectual offering that Ken has given us, and there's a lot of that. And we've also been very influenced by Buddhism, so the stereotypical Buddhist he's very calm, and this is great. I've learned so much from our influence of Buddhism. I use it every day, but me hollering and howling like a lion, doesn't quite fit into that particular paradigm. So I kind of always just want to repress myself and keep it down to a minimum, which is I think it makes it even more strong when it finally comes out. So it's kind of a neurotic struggle with that.
Mm. Okay, excellent. Very good. Well, thank you for sharing. And I hope the rest of us can kind of keep that in mind, all the ways in which we can honor and really treasure our sixes more, have them feel more accepted and loved and connected, as Chuck said, creating those moments of connection with the sixes. So let's maybe at this point open up, and I'm sure there are other sixes or people who are maybe feeling like maybe I'm a six in this group. My first curiosity, however, and let me know if this is okay, is just to engage Chuck and Jeff just a little bit, just for a little while, because we have a couple here, a Chuck who is the 6 and Jeff who is the 5 with a 6 wing. So I'd actually just love to invite Jeff here a little bit, and if that's okay for you to share a little bit about your experience with Chuck as a 6 and you as a 5.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah, it works great. First of all, the couple things I learned here today is, Chuck, it's a funny thing, kind of a problem with authority, but yet a receptivity to new ideas and to love and to connection and that sort of thing. But it can't just be laid on him. That just won't work. There's an instant no, there's an instant rebellion there. A piece that I'd never really put together before, but this idea of the 6 sort of scanning and looking ahead and figuring things out from where they are. One of the things that Chuck continues to amaze me with is that when we're watching a movie or we're watching TV or whatever, he'll say what's going to happen next, and he's right. It's like, how do you know that? Why were you even thinking about that? I'm just enjoying, and Chuck's scanning ahead and getting it most of the time. So we have this long-running joke about how he ruins it for me. He'll give everything away. But I marvel at it.
I can be very annoying too because I pick it apart.
Yes, that's true. But I love it all. The other part that sort of puts it all in context with me was when you were talking about Namali, the whatever wing or whatever it is of the 6, where they're just a good buddy.
Yeah.
And Chuck's a good buddy. We have good buddyhood together. And Chuck loves he has 2 kids and grandkids, and they're absolutely the center of his life. He sits in the middle of a home just full of antiques from this grandparent and that great aunt. And he has this whole family thing going on that's just palpable. And friends. Friends groups, 3 friends groups that I'm always confusing, but one from elementary school, one from the boarding school, and one from college. And these are, pushing 70, these people, and very connected. And Chuck's a big part of that. They do trips and they do calls, and it's just, so Chuck is sort of saturated in that. Loyalist is just such a perfect word. And so that's what I would notice in this moment.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you, Jeff. That's really great. That, I mean, it's always wonderful for the type 3 panel. Also, we had a couple, so it's really wonderful when we kind of have these couple combinations in these panels. So with that, let's open up a little bit.
I'm not quite sure how to articulate this, and it's something that I don't know if I'm projecting or if it's something that I've really heard. So it's sort of a two-part question. One is about authority, and I hear that there's a difficulty in accepting authority, but I think I'm also hearing that 6s are taken as an authority. I heard it from you, Miguel, and I kind of got a sense of it from all of you, that people come to you as an authority. And I was just curious what that feels like to you when people come to you looking for that. And the other thing has to do with the strength of your opinions. John, I heard that, a lot from you, that real, like forceful, really, really, really strong take on what you believe and what you, how it feels when people take you seriously. When people take your opinions seriously.
It's somewhat shocking, really. Yeah. And it feels, I'm punching way above my pay grade constantly in my life. And I'm just amazed that people do listen to me. And I just want to say, as far as authority and leadership, Zelensky, president of Ukraine, is a huge hero of mine. I mean, authority, that's what authority is supposed to be. You give your life for your people. Who's greatest among you is the least of all. It's that model that I always look for, and he has just exhibited it so well. And I'm deeply moved by his example.
Yeah. Well, I don't feel like it's assuming authority. I don't look at it through that lens at all. I look at it as just showing my strong opinions about something, but not even very strong. When I'm in that consulting mode, it's very non-judgmental. I just try to guide as opposed to lead, and so I don't consider myself an authority at all. Somebody is listening to me, and it kind of, to most people, I guess that would sound like authority, but I don't see it through that prism.
Yeah. And to add, Phyllis, like what I was explaining earlier, the way I was trying to explain is like, I don't see as well myself as authority either. It's just that I've put in the work and I have the experience and the understanding of certain things, and people will know that if I've made a decision there, they feel that they don't have to worry too much about trying to understand it all, because I've done the work for that, so they can kind of take that on. But they don't come to me as like, oh, tell me what to do, and I from an authority do that. Like I most of my leadership have been more kind of a servant leadership approach, where I'm just there to serve the team, so not in any authority as well. So I don't know if that helps kind of clarify from that perspective. So,
but the anti-authority is definitely true.
Yes.
I don't know quite what that is. I don't know if it's because I just think I'm smarter than or special. Maybe that's it. Maybe I think I'm special, and that goes against kind of how I feel about myself, but I go 50 in a 35, that kind of thing. And I was so much worse when I was younger. So I think I've mellowed on all of that. But then, then I got this authority problem with political leaders. It just bums me out now. My anger is internal, but that's life.
Indeed. So I see, Billy, you also have your hand up.
My question is around this injustice. I believe my wife's a 6, and she believes she's a 6 with a 5 wing. Myself, 5 with 6 wing. We think, but we're also both very new to this. And so as I've listened and heard the injustice, and I noticed that as a trait of my wife's, would you say there's, my sense is from the call, is that there's not just a noticing of injustice, but an almost going looking for injustice subconsciously. Does that resonate, or is that too strong?
I don't look for it.
I don't think I seek it out.
Yeah, I don't seek it out. I actually, that's something that I start to run away from these days because it's just not good for my mental health.
Okay, thank you.
I think what that brings up for me is perhaps, Billy, just to read a little bit on the subtypes of a 6, because like I mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure if you were on the call at the time, but the social subtype of the 6 can, they can look like a 1 who is rule bound, and they sort of look for justice and duty and that kind of thing. So sometimes social 6s are mistaken for a 1. So what you're saying sounds a bit 1-ish, like the justice orientation, but that could also be because she's a 6 who has a social subtype. So
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll close in just about 5 minutes or so. I know we have gone over our time a little bit. I know I had internet issues and all that, maybe for several of us today. But the closing of the call is with a poem or an excerpt of a poem from Ruby. And there's actually this website, which unfortunately, I don't know what that website is anymore, but I got this from a website there. For each type, they have a little quote from a Rumi poem. And so this is the one for the type 6. And before I go into explaining why they picked this excerpt for a 6, let me just read it, and I'll just quickly check in with each of you to see if that rings a bell for you. Once the seeds of faith take root, it cannot be blown away, even by the strongest wind. John, does that ring a bell for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Once I got smacked by God, it's like it was always there, whether I was running from it or not. And it became, the focus of my, whether in rebellion from it or just, all right, back to square one. Let's start as an agnostic and see where this leads us. But it's always been the center. Either working with or pushing against it. It's always been there, and nothing has been able to shake that. And I almost died with a massive heart attack, and I'm just right there. It's just like, okay, God, if this is my time. It wasn't fear. It was just like, all right,
Okay, there you go. All right. How about you, Chuck?
Yeah, that resonates. But kind of what comes up is the negative seeds also. They take root, and there's something to battle against and something to work on.
Very interesting. Yeah.
So it's a positive thing, as opposed to thinking of a nice green healthy plant root taking root. I'm thinking it's going to be a sickly little thing. I don't know.
That's amazing. There you go, Chuck. It's like that. You just demonstrated to us a classic 6 capacity. Like you see a perspective, and you can also see the flip side of it almost immediately. And often maybe the 6 can tend to go to the negative as well.
Yes, that's one of those negatives that I work on.
Well, thank you, Chuck. Yeah. And then Miguel, once the seeds of faith take root, it cannot be blown away, even by the strongest wind.
Yeah. For me, what came up was the cultivation of the seed to see what kind of flowers from it. So just kind of attending to that, attending to myself, tending to this kind of inner self, just kind of brings about a strength that I think that really contributes positively for the 6. So that's just what's coming up right now.
Wonderful. Really good. So here's what they wrote. Why is this an important poem for type 6s to use for reflection? The holy idea or high mental state for sixes is holy faith in a world of perpetual uncertainty. Holy faith provides sixes the path to certainty in an uncertain world. So once the seeds of faith take root, it cannot be blown away, even by the strongest wind. Yeah. So thank you very much, sixes, and all the audience members here today. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.